All right. And now I'm going to bring up the slides and let's see where we're going to start. Okay, we can start here. So this is the fifth meeting of the Jijang Bosal Book Club. And we have two more meetings to discuss the Ksitigarbha Sutra. And in those two meetings, we'll finish out chapters 9 through 13. We still have a few things to say about chapter 8. Do you have any questions about the parts of the sutra that we're covering now, Joe? Or
Well, I thought the homework was to finish it out to chapter 13.
right, that's
So,
right. Yes. So we're this time and the next meeting we will finish out through chapter 13. Yes, definitely.
okay. No, it's interesting because it seems like there's a lot of repetition, and that's
Yes.
just my thinking.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking that it's for the purpose of really driving this home
Mhm.
that as an option, the people that might be suffering or people that worry about their reincarnation or their dead relatives, but it just seems like it repeats and maybe is driving home the idea is that, hey, that you can make things better for yourself or make things better for others
Mhm.
by having a devotion
Mhm.
to this bodhisattva and,
Mhm.
and chanting or offering and it's interesting just because it also speaks about any merit that you might earn.
Mhm.
If you then transfer it to someone else, then it just, everything is even much better for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Transferring merit is very good, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Now, you before I started the recording, we were talking a little bit about um, chanting the sutra. Now, for for Western Buddhists, or at least for English-speaking Buddhists, I would say probably um, that it's good to recite this sutra in translation, so that we're so that you are actually looking at the meaning and not just kind of repeating syllables. There's a lot to be said for um, chanting it in the original, which would be Chinese or Sanskrit in this case. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit, the actual practice of sutra recitation, because that is one of the things that is um,
Right,
strongly encouraged several times in the
right.
sutra. Before we get there, I just wanted to use uh, Yama is mentioned in chapter 8. I think it was chapter 8, wasn't it? It was, yeah, I'm going to say chapter 8. Um, and so his appearance here is actually uh, Yama figures in a lot of Buddhist traditions. Um, he is figures in Theravada Buddhism. Um, the fact that so-called Hindu gods or Vedic gods and goddesses, there's another Vedic goddess that's going to show up in a minute. She has a whole chapter in the Ksitigarbha Sutra, that's Prithvi, the earth goddess. Um, and it's depending upon the translation you read, you might not realize that the being who's being referred to in that chapter is Prithvi, the earth goddess, the goddess that the Buddha Shakyamuni called upon on the night of his enlightenment. Anyway, but uh, the appearance of beings like Yama or Prithvi or Vishnu, I mentioned Vishnu somewhere down here. Um, this is actually pretty normal in Buddhism for Buddhists throughout their history have, this is what, oh yeah, this is what Miranda Shaw says. Now, this is a wonderful book uh, by Miranda Shaw. It's primarily an art history book, really, but she's got a lot of information about the history of Buddhism packed in here. I say it's art history book because a lot of the material, the evidence that she's using in talking about the Buddhist goddesses of India is uh, uh, art, either either painting, scrolls, and sculpture. She has a lot about art and iconography in this, and one of the things she points out is that um, the earliest uh, archaeological finds that can be positively identified as Buddhist um, buildings, which are stupas. Um, these all show images of the goddess Lakshmi on them. Um, and uh, and what Miranda Shaw says about that is that this demonstrates the difficulty of drawing a line between Buddhist observances and popular devotional idioms, revealing the extent to which Buddhists subscribe to beliefs and practices indistinguishable from those of the surrounding populace, that is, everybody else. So when it wasn't the case, at least according to this way of looking at it, that when people became Buddhists, they didn't, jettison um, whatever their other beliefs and practices were, that they actually incorporated them together. Um, and so the incorporation of the god Yama, the god of death, into Buddhism is another sign of that. Um, Also, especially in Sri Lanka, the god Vishnu is very prominent. Where in Sri Lanka, the legend, one legend anyway, is that prior to his death, Shakyamuni asked the god Indra to look over Sri Lanka, the island of Sri Lanka, so that the Dharma would flourish there in the future. And Indra agreed to do this, and then uh, delegated it, I guess, to Vishnu. Um,
Hmm.
and so sometimes when people encounter something like this, so like, what's Yama doing here? That's kind of the title for this slide. They might think, oh, this is something weird that Mahayana Buddhists or Chinese Buddhists are doing. This is just, it may, in fact, Mahayana Buddhists and Chinese Buddhists do weird things. I'm not saying that they don't. They don't invent things. They don't invent things. They do invent things, insert things, and interpret things in their own ways. Um, but you can go way too far in looking at things that way. And when someone like Yama pops up, um, and in particular, when Yama pops up as like the head of this bureaucracy, this underworld bureaucracy, um, that the way the way the afterlife is often pictured in uh, Chinese and East Asian Buddhist culture, is that you go through a series of hearings, basically going to various magistrates, underworld bureaucrats, um, who then pass judgment on you. And Yama is basically the well. So Yama is the head of um, these kings or judges, and Ksitigarbha is actually the overall head. He's the big boss. And it when it's done in East Asian culture, it comes off as being very Confucianist. But in fact, this is the incorporation of Yama is not an invention of the Chinese or Mahayana Buddhists, and it's typical of Buddhism throughout Asia. That uh, yeah, the elements of pre-existing religions and traditions tend to survive alongside of or inside of Buddhism. Now, oh yeah,
Sure.
another thing I wanted to emphasize from chapter 7 and 8 before we move on to 9 through 13 um, is that one of the things that is emphasized is different times of life. And so a point is made of referring to birth, as a matter of fact. which is not necessarily something that would be um, expected in a sutra devoted to Ksitigarbha, who is the, you know, um, the underworld guide. Um, but actually, in chapter 7 and 8, there's quite a bit of attention paid to the
Hmm.
time of birth and the importance of, so there's uh, a lot of emphasis put on how important it is, both when it comes to the time of death, how important it is both leading up to and then after the time of death, and the importance of uh, helping the person who's dying, and chanting and reciting the names of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and sutras, so that the person who's dying can hear it, and then continuing to do practices for the benefit of the person who has died after they've died. And the same thing is true at birth. It's treated the same way. When the time of birth is approaching, and then immediately after the birth, the same kinds of practices are encouraged. Um,
Hmm.
so basically, what I'm saying is that what the sutra is encouraging is to um, do good acts around the time of birth. Um, and these have to be done for us, right? We're not going to be chanting the Buddha's names um, and giving offerings and performing ceremonies. Um, but then, when we are healthy and strong, we should learn how to do these ourselves, and that's also emphasized in chapter 7 and 8. And then approaching death, and particularly when we get to the point where it is difficult for us to do these things for ourselves, then um, friends and relatives can begin to help us. And then after we're dead, I one can imagine that after death, one can still chant and pray, or not. It's actually so. One of the things that is pointed out in these chapters is that this is a time of difficulty and confusion, and we may not have the wherewithal to do our practice with, you know, it may not be easy. It's not a conducive situation. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
No, just you're thinking on, going back to at birth. Seems to
Uh-huh.
me that in looking at re-entering life as a human
Hmm.
from the reincarnation, so
Hmm.
forth, and that this is a point where you, sort of like the plane is going to be landed here shortly, meaning at birth.
Uh-huh.
And we want to make sure that after all the work that he's done to get
Hmm.
this person at least reborn into a human form, we want to make sure that it's not a bumpy
Hmm.
uh, delivery, and that it's a good birth, meaning a healthy
Hmm.
uh, uh, birth. Just to, I guess, also pave the way for the next life, hopefully being better
Hmm.
and more merit from.
Right.
I would think that yes, if you have a good life, if you live
Hmm.
a good life
Hmm.
and have certain blessings and riches in your life, then not necessarily, but you might have a better chance of uh, staying at least maybe staying in that realm, or if you're going to reincarnate into a higher
Hmm.
level,
Hmm.
it's sort of there for you to help out.
Yeah. Well, so there's two things. One of the things that's emphasized in the Ksitigarbha Sutra in particular is that when human beings in Jambudvipa are in a good situation, we have a tendency to squander it.
Mhm.
Um, and Yeah, so that, I mean, that's very much to what, if I understand you, to what you're saying, that even if we, I mean, so being born human, hopefully in a favorable circumstances, the best kind of birth that there can be in Buddhism is to be born as a human being who has the opportunity and the inclination to practice the Dharma. Um, that's the best thing you can hope for.
Yep.
But you can mess that up. You can have the opportunity and the inclination to practice the Dharma and not do it.
Yep.
Many people, anyway, yeah. And then the other thing that isn't, I don't think it's really emphasized in the Ksitigarbha Sutra, but it's an important thing to keep in mind about karma, is that as soon as you have reaped favorable results due to past good karma, well, then that's done. That's like, that's like getting your paycheck. So that now, when you get the paycheck, what you don't want to do is go out and spend it, because then it's
Right.
gone.
Right.
And so as soon as you get your karmic paycheck, which is some good result from your past good karma, the ideal thing to do is to make good use of it,
Right.
not to just
Right. Like
let it,
paying off your mortgage.
like paying off your mortgage, like putting it in the bank. Yes, doing positive things with it, and of course, from a Buddhist perspective, the most important thing to do with anything good that comes into your life is to share it, is to practice generosity. But anyway, so the point of this slide is just that at birth, when we're healthy and strong, when we're approaching death, when we have died, and when we're in the middle of existence, all of these are covered and repeat. Um, Basically, this is samsara, and the Ksitigarbha Sutra really addresses all of these aspects of life. That is all of life. Um, and just one other thing. Let's see, what's the next slide after this? I want to see where I'm heading. Oh yeah, good. So one more thing I wanted to point out is that the, the the whole business of 49 days. So in Korean Buddhism, the tradition is when someone dies, for 49 days, you chant to Jijang Bosal, hold ceremonies, make offerings, in order to help the person who has died. Now, in fact, throughout in and this is a pretty common, widespread idea in Buddhist countries. Vasubandhu, who was a great, actually Zen master, who lived about 1500 years ago, he looked into this and he collected together all the different theories that he could find by other Buddhist thinkers, and he came up with that there were four different theories about how long how long was the interval between the time of death and the next life. One
Mm-hmm.
theory is that it's pretty quick. Another said it takes 7 days. Another said it takes 49 days. And another theory, which is the one that Vasubandhu seemed to prefer, is that there is really no fixed rule. Now, it's implied, you kind of have to read between the lines, but it's implied that at any time during your wandering through the middle existence between one lifetime and the next, that Jijang Bosal can come along, or I mean, so since it's the Ksitigarbha Sutra, the emphasis is on Jijang Bosal, but at any time during that period, you can be, escorted along to your next favorable birth, because the time in the middle existence is, especially from this East Asian perspective, where you're going from one judge to another judge, from one hearing to another hearing, waiting to hear the verdict on your case, is not a pleasant time, and it's not an easy. There's a lot of theories about how difficult this can be, and so there's really no fixed rule, because you can say that there's as a general rule that it's 49 days, and actually in East Asian Buddhism, it's usually considered that it can extend even beyond 49 days up to 2 or even 3 years, um, but that this can be short-circuited at any time, and you would actually prefer for that to be the case. Um, Interestingly, in a really good book by Zen Master Sheng Yen, Mindfulness and the Buddha, Mindfulness of the Buddha and the Concept of Pure Land, he emphasizes that the first 7 days are really the most important. So for people who are concerned about their dead loved ones, um, the Chinese tradition, Sheng Yen is a Chinese Buddhist, is to, as in Korea, to do ceremonies and chant and pray for 49 days. But he says really the most important time is the first 7 days. So I thought that was interesting. All right. Now, so now I want to talk, we'll talk some more about, so let me just peek ahead a little bit here. Yeah, so one of the things, chapter 9 is all about names of Buddhas. And I actually thought that was very interesting. This is a quote from chapter 13, but this also refers back to the practice of reciting names of Buddhas. But before I get to that, here I am. I don't want to jump around too much. I want to talk about the practice of sutra recitation and how to do it correctly. And basically, the you can go on Amazon, right, or wherever. Go to Wisdom Publications or Shambhala Publishers or wherever you buy your Buddhist books from. You're going to go to it. I mean, if you're a real freak, you can go to an actual physical bookstore and look at the Buddhist section there. But you just buy it. You buy a book, or a friend lends you a book. Or you go to if you're an even bigger freak, you could go to a library and check out a book on Buddhism. Anyway, these are pretty normal kind of activities, but now you have in your hands a sutra. And one of the things that I didn't include on this slide, and I just now thought of, is that the way that we treat sutras is actually kind of important, even though you go to a bookstore, you go online, you go to a library, a friend lends you a book, any of the normal, it could be a detective novel, it could be, a tour guide, whatever, but if it's a sutra, it should be treated like a sutra. Not just as another book, and so it should be. So there's a couple of actually, probably the most important thing that has been emphasized to me over the years is that you don't place the sutras on the floor. And also, so I've got a sutra over here. You don't have to put them all on an altar, but I happen to have a little altar right over here. I'm taking my copy of actually I've got the Medicine Buddha Sutra and the Ksitigarbha Sutra on the same altar. I grabbed the Medicine Buddha, but it's traditional, if you want to be traditional, to actually put the sutra over your head as a sign of respect when picking it up or when putting it back down. I'm going to put it back on the altar now. And especially if you happen to drop it, or if you do accidentally place it on the floor or something, that's a good thing to do. But then what I really wanted to talk more about in this part of the class is, like I said, how to do sutra recitation in the right way. Now, you can always just pick up the Vimalakirti Sutra or a book on the Heart Sutra or whatever, just read it. You don't have to turn it into a spiritual practice. But if you want to do sutra recitation or sutra study, and you want to make it a spiritual practice for that period of time, you say you want to read a chapter or a section of the Ksitigarbha Sutra. There are some very short verses, and mantras that you can learn, um, that are traditionally done before and after um, uh, sutra recitation. Now, on your own, you can certainly do this, and actually, this is a good practice to do on your own. If you want to say, I'm going to read the Ksitigarbha Sutra. I'm going to read, I'm going to break it up into thirds, and I'm going to spend 3 days reading it, just as an example. Or you might even say, I'm going to read it straight through. I'm going to just, which actually I think is a good idea to do at least once. Read it straight through. It takes less than 3 hours. But this part here, before sutra recitation, this is actually all from the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra chanting. You know that? Have you ever done the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, Joe?
No,
Okay, so this is like
no.
um, the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra is uh, a very important traditional Korean Buddhist chant. Basically, what it is, it's a container for. Lose my voice just a second. Anyway, it's a container for the Great Dharani. So the Great Dharani is embedded within the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, and so the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra is kind of a model for the right way to do some sort of a recitation practice and um, really supercharge it. So if you do the full Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, there's lots of mantras and stuff, but there's a section at the beginning that's relatively short, which is just the mantra to purify speech, Jonggup Janon, which is the title of the mantra, and then Suri Suri Mahasuri Susuri Sabaha is the mantra itself. And you say that 3 times. Now the next part here, this is a very standard thing. You'll find this like in Soto and Rinzai chanting books. This is whenever a sutra is going to be read as part of a service or a ceremony of any kind. This is recited either in English or in Sino-Korean or Sino-Japanese or whatever. The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see it. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. So it's I don't know where I grabbed that. I actually just grabbed a translation from some website. First website I found that had this in both it had both the Chinese and an English translation. And then this is and this is how you say it. And so like in the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, you say Suri Suri Mahasuri Susuri Sabaha, 3 times. Gekyong ge musang shim shim yim yobo bekchon man gop nanjo u agu mun yong duksu ji onhe yore jinshire. And one of the things we were talking about before the recording started, Joe, was how chantable things are, and you a lot of times you have to know what especially if you're not a native speaker of the language that you're chanting in, you don't know how the rhythms work.
Sure.
And even if you are, you don't know which meter you may or may not know. Now, if you're like an expert in Chinese poetry, you might be able to look at something and you automatically know this is in such and such a meter, and it's supposed to be, repeated like this. But this has a certain rhythm, and the only way I know the rhythm of this is having chanted the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra many, many times. And the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra is a wonderful example of a truly energetic chant where you get a lot more energy than you had before you chanted it. But anyway, so this is just a small part of it. And then after that is the opening the Dharma treasure mantra. Gebok Changjinom Om Aranam Arada Om Aranam. Anyway, so this is I want these slides to have useful information for people. This is something that that a person could come along and just experiment with. And if you actually want to know how this sounds, there are YouTube videos with recordings, including ones that I put up myself, which is not just me alone, but chanting with other people, of doing the entire Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra. The part that's done after the sutra recitation, you do know, Joe, you have done. This is straight out of Kwanzaa Bosal chanting and Jijang Bosal
Yep.
chanting. Bogo Jinon Om Horo Horo Sayamoke Sabaha. And Boho Hyang Jinon Om Samara
Mhm.
Samana Mimara Dharma Jagodabarum. I got a little asterisk next to this because when I have tried to look up the get the Chinese characters in the Hangul for this part, it looks like it's a little different from what I've been taught to chant and what everybody who's learned the Korean traditional chanting from Zen Master Sung San or from teachers who were trained under him. But I'm still working on that. So the reason why I put this asterisk here is that if you know Hangul, you'll know that it doesn't say, this part does not say Mimara Jarama Ja, Mimara Jarama. It doesn't say that. It's close, but it's not. That's not what it says. But it's no big deal. So it's more important to know how to chant, to learn how to chant for people who are part of the tradition, and to do the chant the way that you've been taught, and the way that other people that you are, co-traditionalists with or whatever. That's better than trying to do it according to some idea of what may or may not be correct. So we're now at 7:33. So I'm going to let's see. Do you have any questions about this, Joe?
No, but I will look for those YouTube videos that you mentioned, just to sort of hear this in place.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me,
Yeah.
is
Mm-hmm.
the thousand hands and eyes, is that only for special celebrations, certain
Oh no.
occasions?
So uh, in the chanting class that you're also taking, right? Um,
Yes.
yeah, so I've mentioned a couple of times that there are these cheap, very inexpensive um, chanting books that are very popular in Korea. That cost like you know less than $5 or even like less than $3.
Yes.
One of the main things that they have, one of the primary, basically uh, the centerpiece of these is the thousand hands and eyes sutra. So you're an average Korean lay Buddhist who does chanting as part of their regular practice. That's probably the main thing that they do is the thousand
Hmm.
hands and eyes sutra. And once you know it, or you don't even have to, once you know it pretty well, you can do it. It's might take takes less than 15 minutes, but 15 minutes, a chant that lasts 15 minutes, that's a lot. Um, Unless you're comparing it to like the Diamond Sutra or the Lotus Sutra, which take much longer than that, or the Ksitigarbha Sutra, or the Medicine Buddha Sutra, which I was holding up before. So the Medicine Buddha Sutra is nice. It's also something that's traditional that people chant. One of the I want to go, but anyway, it's about a third of the length of the Ksitigarbha Sutra. So the Medicine Buddha Sutra is even more amenable to this. But this right here, I'm not gonna like really chant it, but I'll just say Jongo Janon Suri Suri Mahasuri Susuri Sabaha Suri Suri Mahasuri Susuri Sabaha Suri Suri Mahasuri Susuri Sabaha Ge Wusang Shim Shim Mimyo Bok Bekchon Man Gop Nanjo Agum Agum Munjon Duksuji Wonheyore Wonheyore Jinshire Ge Bok Changjiron Om Aranam Arada Om Aranam Arada Om Aranam Arada. And that you could do in a minute, And if you just do that as like as a little ritual, and then read what you're going to read from any sutra. This is applicable to any sutra, and this is a way to. It doesn't mean that you have to do this. I certainly don't do this every time I pick up if I'm looking for something in the Avatamsaka Sutra or the Lotus Sutra or whatever, or if I'm, but you can do this. And
Mm.
especially if you are doing something with some particular intention. Um, and again, if you learn the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, so I do this all the time when I chant the Thousand Eyes Sutra, which with Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, which I do quite often. Um, so I get a lot of practice doing this, even though you probably couldn't tell it from my rendition. Um, just like I do this a lot too, because it's every time I do the Kwanzaa Bosal or the Jijang Bosal chant, I do this. These are good things to know. And oh, just one uh, yeah, I'm gonna go a little bit over 7:35. We'll still have a full 5 minute break. But um, this uh, this mantra for repairing mistakes and omissions. I don't know if I've talked about this in this class or in anything that you've been at, Joe, but
Yes.
this actually comes from Jijang Bosal. Do you know
Right.
that? Have you
Yes.
heard that?
You mentioned
Yeah,
it there.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's a great story about the guy who uh, chanted the Lotus Sutra 10,000 times and made 100 mistakes every time he chanted it. So for a grand total of 1 million mistakes, and 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 then a friend of his died, and Jijang Bosal, instead of escorting his friend to his next life, taught him this mantra and sent him back and said, "Go teach this to your friend, and also teach it to everybody else too, because this is the mantra for correcting mistakes." And so this is Om Horo Horo Sai Moke Sabaha. This is an excellent mantra to know, unless you
So
don't like me.
if you trip
Yeah.
up and make a mistake while you're actually chanting or reciting the sutra,
Hmm.
this mantra will fix it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think yes, that's certainly what Jijang also said. If you've made 1 million mistakes, you really need to chant this mantra a lot. And so it's it's a way of kind of acknowledging our imperfection while at the same time saying we're gonna, every time we practice imperfectly. Um, it's important
Mhm.
to acknowledge that, but it's also very necessary to practice anyway. In fact, the only people who really need to practice are the ones who don't practice perfectly. Um, and so we need practices like this in order to encourage us at the same time, um, remind us. It's more than anything else. You could think of this as just a reminder that your practice is imperfect, but that your practice is also absolutely necessary. Um,
And maybe
and
it
yeah,
restores full merit that, if you made a lot of mistakes, then you would not
yes,
receive full merit. But by doing this, you're putting it back in so that if you're offering the merit for whichever, whoever,
uh-huh.
um,
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the literal interpretation of what this is supposed to do. Zen Master Sung San, actually his description of this mantra was that this mantra is like, he called it the extra mantra. He said this is like when you buy a jacket and it has extra buttons sewn inside of it, you know. So this mantra is like that.
yeah,
When the buttons fall off of your practice, you have this mantra
there it is.
to replace them. Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining that. Okay, so we'll take a break now for
Okay,
5 minutes and come back and talk some more about the Ksitigarbha Sutra. Okay.
all right. Thanks. Is it time yet?
It is time. Here we are. Okay. So, correcting some mistakes on the slides in real time here. All right. So, this next slide jumps right to a quote from chapter 13, but also referring back to chapter 9. So, this kind of makes a sandwich of the section of the sutra that we're focusing on tonight and in our next meeting in 2 weeks. Ksitigarbha, Ksitigarbha, remember that today in Triastrimsa heaven, in this great assembly of hundreds of thousands of myriads of millions of inexpressibly inexpressible number of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, oh, there's another mistake, Devas, Nagas, and others of the 8 classes of beings, I once again entrust to you humans, devas, and other beings who have not yet left the threefold world, who are still in this burning house. Do not allow these living beings to fall into the lower realms, even for a single day and night, much less fall into the hell with fivefold incessancy, or the Avicii hell, where they should pass through thousands of myriads and millions of kalpas without a time of release. Ksitigarbha, living beings of Jambudvipa are without fixity in their wills and characters. Most of them are accustomed to evil. Even when they generate a wholesome mind, it fades within a short time. This is, so I laugh just because a lot of the Ksitigarbha Sutra consists, and I said this at our last meeting, consists of Ksitigarbha and Shakyamuni talking about us. Anyway, if they encounter evil conditions, the unwholesome is increased thought upon thought. For this reason, I transform into hundreds of thousands and millions of emanation forms to teach beings and guide them across to liberation, all in accord with their capacities and dispositions. Ksitigarbha, I now earnestly entrust devas, humans, and the multitudes of beings to you. In the future, if there are devas, good men and good women, who plant a few roots of goodness in Buddha Dharma, even as little as a strand of hair, a speck of dust, a grain of sand, or a drop of water, you should use the power of the noble path to support and protect them, so that they gradually cultivate the unsurpassed way and do not retreat from it or lose it. Furthermore, Ksitigarbha, in the future, if devas or humans fall into the lower realms to undergo ripened effects according to their karma, and when on the verge of falling into these lower realms or at the front of these entrances, if these beings are able to recollect a Buddha's name, a Bodhisattva's name, I did it again, I have to correct the spelling here, or a sentence or a verse from the Mahayana Sutras, you should use your spiritual power to skillfully rescue these beings. Manifest your infinite forms at the places where they are, shatter the hells for them, and enable them to be reborn in the heavens and experience excellent, wonderful happiness. So that's all from chapter 13. So there's a couple of interesting things in this passage. I like the reference to the burning house, which is one of the standard images that one finds throughout Buddha's teaching, going back to the earliest teachings of the Buddha, but it's also one of the key images that's associated with the Lotus Sutra. And there's actually a lot of, I wouldn't say overlap, but I would say that the Ksitigarbha Sutra is very closely closely, I don't know, associated with, at least in my mind, with the Lotus Sutra, and for a number of reasons. Um, uh, yeah, one reason is that they're both they're both supposed to have been taught around the same time. In the Ksitigarbha Sutra, there are a couple of times, especially in these last 5 chapters, where the Buddha refers to his impending parinirvana. The Buddha's impending parinirvana is also a theme in the Lotus Sutra, and even more so in the Mahayana Parinirvana Sutra, which is called the Parinirvana Sutra because it's the sutra that contains the last days and the last teachings of the Buddha. Um, but oh yeah. Oh, another thing that I think is cool is Ksitigarbha shatters the hells for them. This idea of shattering hells. This is in both the evening bell chant has the mantra for shattering hell, and the morning bell chant has an even longer mantra for shattering hell in it. Morning bell chant is another excellent practice, and one of the great things about the morning bell chant is that it has, a mantra for shattering hell. What could be better than shattering hell? And oh yeah, but the thing that the main reason why I picked out this quote to focus on is because of the emphasis that it places on um, uh, being able to, well, to recollect a Buddha's name. So um, to in fact, I should have tracked this down. I'm gonna look this up to see what. So one of the things that I do want to do in this class is to share. Let me stop sharing my screen for just a second as I search around for something I've got. There is a PDF. I will include it in uh, the links that are provided along with in the description to this video once I upload it to YouTube. But there's a PDF that has the original Chinese along with here it is. Yes, indeed. Yeah. And now I can share my screen again. Okay. So let's look at this. This is really nice. I could even make it smaller. Try to increase the zooming. Yeah, it's better. Okay, so it's nice to be able to compare. It's a fairly daunting task, no doubt, if you don't know Chinese, which I don't. But nevertheless, there are many times when you might wonder what is actually being said here. If you read many different translations of sutras, or even a couple, you'll find that one translation says things sometimes quite differently than another translation, and um, it's nice to know what was actually said, what is actually being translated. Let me just find one phrase that pops up a lot in this sutra. Let me see. Hundreds of thousands of myriads. Oh yeah, here it is. Good men and good women. So whenever I encounter this phrase in a English translation of the sutra, I always wonder, is that, sometimes modern translators will try to make the sutras more politically correct, uh, in which I think is probably misguided. But I mean, it's not misguided to be politically correct. It's not misguided to be, to disapprove of sexism. Um, but in fact, when pretty much whenever you encounter this phrase "good men and good women" in a Buddha sutra, that's what's actually being said. And so there is an explicit inclusion, and even a equality. I mean, there's no anyway that's being done, and you can find that if you look at. I will not be able to find this particular passage, but if you, this is a pretty good uh, uh, job of putting the English translation and the Chinese side by side. Um, uh, you can actually match up, like they do the paragraphing so that you can figure out which paragraph it's in, and you can track things down pretty easily. This is, oh yeah, anyway, I just wanted to show that. And I will make that available. It's not mine. It's, well, I should kind of give the, who has this?
Kurt,
Yes, go ahead.
tell me, who is that referencing?
Uh-huh.
Who is that? Because in the sutra, it also,
Oh. Mhm.
there are certain points of talking about you'll be reborn in male form, or
Ah, okay,
if
that's
you
good,
have
because
to
that
be
actually, yeah,
reborn in female form, then you're going to have a good complexion. Uh,
yeah,
things like that, which I read into like, oh, they'll be able to marry you off. That
yeah. Well, so
um,
so the some some sutras are some sutras need to be made more politically correct, or at least they're asking for it. I would say in the Ksitigarbha Sutra, it's not so much the case. There is uh, so what one encounters sometimes is just a blanket claim that women cannot become Buddhas, women cannot become enlightened, women cannot do this, women cannot do that, women cannot enter the Pure Land, um, whatever. Now, the Ksitigarbha Sutra, the setting for the Ksitigarbha Sutra is the Buddha going up to Triastrimsa Heaven to teach his mother. Now, some people say, "Oh, well, she's been transformed into a man," but she's still referred to as the Buddha's mother, and so, sometimes people get a little too clever with these things, but there's clearly, I mean, there were clearly students of the Buddha going back to the earliest teachings of the Buddha, um, who
yeah, and
were.
that's why I asked that. Was he
Mhm.
speaking to people who were heavenly bodies at that point, and so they had
So what do
moved
you mean when
on?
it says good men and good women? Is that who you're
Right,
talking?
There-
Oh yeah.
right,
So
and
that, yeah.
there's a quality there, but down on Earth, you're going to get
No,
born with a good complexion.
no. So for good men and good women, when that phrase is encountered, it's referring to human beings living on Earth in Jabudvipa.
Okay, okay,
It's referring to us good men and good women. So and by by implication, it means people who are trying to be good.
right, right, on a
As
slippery
good.
slope.
I mean, as good. So this translation and is by Jeanne Tsai, and this comes from the Guangshan International Translation Center, and they have been kind enough to put this out on the internet in the PDF format, not to be sold for free distribution only. Um, and it's kind of hard to find. I have the PDF, and I'll put it. I'll just put a direct link to it in the
Great,
description for this video.
great.
And But one of the useful things in having the original Chinese available is then in trying to sort through um, in in chapter 9. One of the things that I'm quite interested in the material that's in chapter 9 is the names of these different Buddhas. There are, well, actually, I didn't count them up. I have, so anyway, so I put them here. But then I redid it again on the next slide. So I'm going to go back into slideshow mode. Go to the next slide. Yeah. And this is a little bit more, this is actually getting close to something that I could use for chanting. So I've written out the kind of romanization of each of the names of these Buddhas that are listed in chapter 9, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 of them. So I think I got them all. And it's so I've got for each of them, I've got the full Chinese name. I've got the spelled out in Hangul. I've got more or less what the Romanized version of the Sino-Korean pronunciation is, which is what I would use to chant. And then where possible, I found the Sanskrit name for these Buddhas. And in some cases, the Sanskrit name just isn't, I haven't found it anywhere. And all you can find is like an English representation, an English translation of the name. And some things are interesting. Simananda is Sanskrit for lion's roar. Let's see. Oh yeah. So we've got a Sumeru and a Mahavijna Sumeru. We've got a anyway. And so some of these are moon-faced Buddha. Oh yeah, the last one. Interesting that moon-faced Buddha comes in last here. So moon-faced Buddha is also in the Lotus Sutra. Now, the Lotus Sutra and other sutras have much longer lists of Buddhas. One of the things that's kind of nice about this chapter 9 of the Ksitigarbha Sutra is that it provides us with a fairly reasonable list of Buddhas. Now there are practices of chanting Buddha's names that go on and on and on for hours and hours and hours. But this is kind of a nice one. And one of the things that is, I think, quite nice about what's said in the Ksitigarbha Sutra is that if you remember one Buddha's name, they will attain measureless virtue. How much more so when they remember many names? Now, this may sound like a fairly innocuous statement, but there are actually people who argue strongly that it's really best to just chant one Buddha's name. And of course, the one Buddha that they're talking about is Amitabha. So there are partisans of, and one of them was actually a great Buddhist teacher named Shandao, and Shandao's argument that you should only chant the name of Amitabha is that this is an easier, more doable practice, and that if you fill your head with lots of names of Buddhas, it will dissipate your focus and your concentration. Whereas this argument is going in exactly the opposite direction. It says if you remember a single Buddha's name, you will attain measureless virtues. How much more so than if you remember many names? So it's not a contest to remember a whole bunch of different Buddha's names. And many people who, if you read enough sutras and if you learn enough different practices, sometimes people do even face the question of, oh, which Pure Land should I want to be reborn in? I don't know. Have you ever wondered that, Joe?
No, I haven't.
Okay, yeah, that's probably good. It's not a good. Well, I mean, in a way, it's a good sign because if you're wondering which Pure Land do I want to be reborn in, it means that you're thinking about it. It means that you're taking it seriously. But at the same time, one of the things, if you read the fine print on Pure Lands, once you get into one Pure Land, you can go from that Pure Land to other Pure Lands. Uh, but then yeah, and this issue of whether or not women can get into various Pure Lands, that also becomes an issue as well. Um, the heaven that the Buddha was teaching the sutra in, obviously women can get into there. And Tushita heaven, which is where Maitreya Buddha is, and many people pray to be reborn in Tushita heaven in order to study with Maitreya until he's ready to come back down here. I really shouldn't go off on that tangent, but I just think it's cool to learn some. I think it's actually each of these Buddhas is kind of interesting. It when you are confronted with a list of Buddha's names, it can be a little mind numbing. Um, oh yeah, and speaking of mind numbing, so uh, chanting. This is kind of a I don't know. Chanting a single Buddha or Bodhisattva's name over and over and over again uh, can be kind of mind numbing. Chanting a list of 1,000 names of 1,000 different Buddhas can be kind of mind numbing. So I actually think this is a little less mind numbing. I think this is a list of this length is a bit of a sweet spot. But Shandao had a certain point. Uh, you know that sticking to chanting one Buddha's name, I can see that. It's a legitimate point. But I also have to say that Ksitigarbha has a point too.
Sure, sure.
And so, and this is often the case with different practices, different approaches, different traditions, that it's not, you know, uh, either or. It's not. I mean, at some point, when it's time to sit down and practice, you have to do something, and you should, fix your intention and do that practice. Um, you shouldn't spend your time on the cushion trying to figure out what it is that you're doing on the cushion or what you're going to do. And you also shouldn't spend your time switching back and forth between a lot of different things. Um, anyway,
Right.
I don't know. Do you have anything to say about that, Joe?
No,
It's a
because I
deep.
usually just do like for myself the two main big ones, Kwanzaa
Uh-huh.
Bosal and
Yeah.
Jijang Bosal.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Um, and I don't have any others that
Uh-huh.
I chant, but I'll take a look at this list. I mean, part of it is I
Hmm.
think if I were to introduce anyone one at a time, I would have
Uh-huh.
to look up the name,
Hmm.
learn
Hmm.
more about
Yeah.
the identity of that Buddha and so forth, and learn
Yeah.
a little bit more. Because I think having just one or just having a few builds a stronger, what I would call a relationship.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and and if you're just for the sake of going through a list, then that's a very weak sort
Yeah.
of
Right.
association.
Right. And I think that one potential positive thing about this particular list that Jijang Bosal has so generously and helpfully offered us is that for most of these you can find a lot of interesting information. Some of these are previous Buddhas in our world system that came before Shakyamuni Buddha.
Sure.
Some of them are famous Buddhas like Moonface Buddha, who's famous for the fact that he lived for only a day and a night after he attained enlightenment. Um, uh, um, let's see. There's okay, and the last slide that I have prepared. Um, this goes over and I've done this for chapters 9 to 13. I'm going to do it for the whole sutra as well. Um, Giving the title in Chinese, and then going through, and this is kind of an important thing to do. Look at each chapter and see who's actually speaking, who's teaching in each chapter. In some chapters, it's often Shakyamuni and Ksitigarbha. That's the case in chapters 9 and 10. And 11 is different being. Um, the Who turns out to be, this is the uh, Chinese name. This is Prithvi, the earth goddess. Whenever you see a picture of the Buddha seated in meditation with his hand reaching down and touching the earth, he's calling upon Prithvi to witness his worthiness to attain enlightenment. And he's responding to the challenge of Mara, um, who said, "Who are you?" When the Buddha was sitting under um, the tree of enlightenment, before he attained his enlightenment, Mara challenged him, and um, in response to that challenge, Shakyamuni Buddha, who wasn't the Buddha yet, he was still Siddhartha. He called upon Prithvi to bear witness to his readiness and worthiness to attain enlightenment, which he did. Um, and actually, the last two chapters are quite interesting for who they introduce. Avalokitesvara shows up in chapter 12.
Right. Right.
And then Ksitigarbha shows up in chapter 13. Ksitigarbha is not particularly famous, um, but he's kind of important, and he's very closely related to the Ksitigarbha. So we'll talk about that next time. I keep looking at trying to figure out what time it is. Oh yeah, it is time to begin to wrap it up at least. Um, uh, let's see. So what I want to do is I want to create a as concise as possible, summation chapter by chapter of the whole sutra, where I give. It's actually interesting to look at the different English translations that are given in different translations. Sometimes they're um, wildly different. But when you're trying to look things up and somebody says, oh, it's in the chapter on the names of Buddhas, or it's in the chapter on conditions and virtues of giving, or this one in particular has a lot of different titles, a lot of different translations. Anyway,
Right.
yeah.
Almost as if you're giving each chapter a title
Uh-huh.
of what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Um, let's see. I think that's what I have prepared, and we should wrap it up. What do you think, Joe? Are we done?
I'm good. I'm good.
Let's see. Do have to find.
But
Yeah.
before we recorded, we spoke a little bit about
Yeah.
offerings,
Mhm.
and we can save that for the next class as we get into that final chapter. So,
Uh-huh.
um, just about the ritual involved and so forth.
Uh-huh. Well, so remind me, what were we saying? I don't remember. So the
Well,
people.
just that we were talking about just the many ways, and I was referring to the repetition
Oh. Uh-huh.
of the options that one would have or your relatives would have.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and one of them is being offerings, whether
Yes.
it's scented flowers. I found that peculiar, scented flowers
Uh-huh.
opposed to unscented flowers.
Yeah.
But also there was, I think it was more in 13, of offering a glass of water, of pure water,
Oh.
for one day and one night, and then
Yes.
drinking it facing south. Uh,
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. So I think that is in chapter 13. Ksitigarbha is associated with the direction of the south.
okay. Because he's
And
looking towards the southern region where we all are.
that's right. Yeah. So
Okay,
he's
makes
the Lord
sense.
of the southern region. Uh, this uh, uh, this is a really common thing in Chinese and East Asian Buddhism in general. to put when you have a ceremony to put, well, first of all, it's very common to put all kinds of offerings, goodies, cake,
Yes.
especially cake and fruit.
Yep.
But one thing in particular that people do is put water on the altar or around the altar. Often there's so many offerings that most of it has to just be stacked up around the altar.
Right.
Um, and then those are um, in Hinduism, those offerings are then called prasad, which is actually the Sanskrit word for leftovers, which means you
Hmm.
have offered them to the gods, or in the case of Buddhism, you have offered them to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and they have taken, what they're going to take, and everything else is leftovers for us. Um, and so a ceremony like that always ends in people eating lots of fruit and cakes. Um,
Peace.
and then when water is put on the altar in a ceremony like that, then the water is treated as very special. You don't just, so you drink it, but you treat it very respectfully after that, and it's supposed to be, I don't know,
Almost becomes
magic.
holy water.
Well,
It
yeah, I
becomes like
mean,
a holy water.
yeah. So it's not. I wouldn't use it in an exorcism, or maybe I would. I don't know. But
You're saying it's
um,
not that strong?
yeah, I don't know. But it would be something you would give to someone who is sick, or someone
Mm.
who is troubled or having some sort of difficulty, or if you were sick or having difficulty.
I'll
Yeah,
remember that.
yeah.
Okay.
Talk about
And
that next time.
normally
Mhm.
we don't do any of that in our normal weekly practices.
Oh yeah. So in a normal, so that's more. I've encountered that more when a ceremony is being done. So
Okay.
when there's this can be done, and I've seen it done on, like, for precept ceremonies or any other kind of ceremony. Uh, it's definitely always appropriate to. I mean, generally speaking, for a ceremony, people bring stuff, and they
Right.
bring, you can think of it as like a potluck, but um, ideally, people would bring stuff that then is put on the altar during the ceremony, and then it becomes prasad um, once the ceremony is over, and everybody has a nice uh, party, basically.
Right. Right.
Okay, all right. So let's recite the four vows now. I'm going to uh, mute you, Joe, so that, because it doesn't work if there's more than one person talking at a time. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. Great to see you.
Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, thank you. See
It's
you.
very interesting.
Bye bye.